It's the end of an era for foldable tech. Allow me to explain. If you cast your mind back just 6 years, foldables were pretty janky. Small cover screens, chintzy thick designs, lousy battery life, and all the durability of a champagne flute made out of merengue. A fold could be a lot of fun, but it came with a laundry list of compromises. But I've been using a phone recently that really does feel like a coming of age for this category. And it has me thinking that already it could be the phone to beat Samsung's Fold 7. So it's time to take a look back at how we got here, from the very earliest foldables right through to the cutting edge of devices like the Magic V5 here. Let's jump in. The first technological breakthrough that paved the way for foldable phones was Foldable OLED itself. This key technology has been around longer than you might think. It was first shown off by Sony way back at the CES show in 2009, so long ago that one of the concept devices demoed later that year was this wearable Walkman music player. Into the 2010s, I remember Samsung regularly teasing flexible OLED at various trade shows like Mobile World Congress, even producing this promo video showing how combined phone plus tablet devices could work.
Wow, that's amazing. Can I see that?
Yeah. And while this looks extremely quaint compared to the tech of the mid-2020s, freeze frame here and you can see a hefty wedge-shaped gap when it's folded shut, all the key ingredients of a modern foldable are there. Flexible OLED panels hit mass market status in the 2010s. Instead of attaching these little light-emitting diodes to a glass substrate, it used plastic, allowing for lighter weight devices that were less likely to suffer catastrophic failure in the event of an accidental rendezvous with a hardwood floor. The tech enabled various gimmicky handsets to come to market in the middle of the last decade, including Samsung's Galaxy Round, which was curved on the horizontal, and the LG G Flex, which could actually kind of bend. I don't know, it was LG in 2014, weird was kind of their whole thing. The curved screen design you probably remember the most though came in 2015 with the Galaxy S6 Edge, and then countless other handsets that sported this twin curved edge arrangement that became the go-to phone design for the latter part of that decade. Actual foldable screen gadgets though remained stuck in development hell throughout this period. Display companies were keen to show off concepts, but for a long time we seemed no closer to that dream of a phone that folded out into a tablet, or a laptop that opened out into a big old foldable screen. That slow crawl through the 2010s finally brought us to the brink of something real in 2019.
When it's open, it's a tablet, offering a big screen experience. When closed, it's a phone that fits neatly inside your pocket.
Samsung teased its first foldable phone in late 2018, but the first actual book-style phone with a foldable screen came in January 2019 in the form of the Royal FlexPi. And boy was this thing rough. The FlexPi used a single OLED panel curved on the outside, and while that meant it could be propped up in tent mode, it also meant that delicate foldable OLED was exposed at all times, and likely to wear unevenly, because the pixels on one side, when in use when it was folded flat, would be lit up more often. Not that this thing could really fold flat though, it featured an oversized hinge and that resulted in a bulky wedge shape overall. Tipping the scales at 320 grams, it's almost 1.5 times the weight of the Magic V5. I actually used the Royal FlexPi at CES 2019 and was confounded by janky software that'd often break and not know which mode it was supposed to be in, along with a nasty feeling rubber hinge covering and, well, voluptuous screen borders. My old friend Vlad Savov, writing for The Verge at the time, aptly summed it up as charmingly awful. Royal managed to cough up a FlexPi 2 in 2020, but perhaps unsurprisingly, found itself bankrupt by 2024. Although it wasn't first to market, most people see the foldable era as starting with this, the original Samsung Galaxy Fold. And while this was leaps and bounds ahead of the FlexPi, getting on the ground floor with the first mass market foldable required deep pockets and the willingness to live with many compromises. The cover screen was tiny and challenging to use in many apps. It was still decidedly wedgy when it was closed up. There was no ingress protection rating for water or dust resistance, battery life was reported to be inconsistent in early reviews, and all for $2,000 in 2019 or closer to $2,500 in 2025 money. And you may have forgotten, but the launch of the OG Fold wasn't without its share of drama. Originally slated to arrive in April, the device slipped to an October launch after the inner displays of review devices sent to press and influencers started to spontaneously break. As an aside, that was a separate issue from some reviewers not realizing that the inner screen protector was not supposed to be removed. Now remember though, this was just 2.5 years after the whole Galaxy Note 7 debacle, so not a great look for Samsung. Ultimately, the version that launched in October 2019 was more reliable, giving buyers an imperfect and expensive glimpse at the future we're living today. It was impressive for the time, but consider the profile and thickness of this thing, up to 17.1mm when closed, compared to the new thinnest foldable of 2025 measuring just 8.8mm when it's closed. Of course, not everyone wanted a book-sized gadget. Enter the clamshell foldable, starting with the Galaxy Z Flip in early 2020. Flip phones like this brought foldables into pockets and purses with more manageable sizes and price points. And more importantly for a lot of people, they were just fun. The Z Flip also marked an important milestone by being the first to use ultra-thin glass. The OG Galaxy Folds display was very much an all-plastic affair. UTG was a key breakthrough in foldable tech and, as the name suggests, includes a layer of chemically reinforced glass measuring in just the tens of microns. Today, all modern foldables use a similar material. But what made these early foldables even more challenging wasn't just the screen, it was what held them together. Hinge technology is one area that's easy to overlook, but it's a key part of a foldable that needs to reliably function over and over again across several years of operation. And that hinge needs to be protected against everything from the lint in your pocket to everyday wear and tear. Too loose and the device feels cheap. I've leveled that criticism at some Moto foldables over the years with their decidedly floppy hinges. Too firm or inconsistent and it can be difficult to open, as seen in the Royal FlexPi. And the sound, if any, that the hinge makes is a key part of the experience too. Get a load of this crinkly plastic film sound accompanying each open of the Z Fold 4 here. Just one of the many compromises that still existed in foldables as recently as 2022. The materials of the hinge are also key, and a major reason modern foldables are rated for hundreds of thousands of folds across their lifetime. Honor's pushing its own super steel material and has claimed in interviews to be placing materials at the center of its R&D efforts for foldables, making them thinner and stronger. Samsung meanwhile has used tiny brushes within its frames to prevent dust buildup inside of foldables. Small bits of dust can still potentially get through, but they'll deflect larger bits of debris that were notorious for getting under the hinge and killing the displays of first-gen folds. So the hinge is a really key area of foldable tech because, as the manufacturer, if you get the hinge wrong, it could potentially kill the phone and leave you dealing with a big old pile of RMA devices. Speaking of which, foldable displays are likely always going to be more fragile than flat ones, and repairability is still challenging to say the least. Replacing a foldable display is expensive, and third-party repair options are limited. While these things are tougher than they used to be, they're still not exactly user serviceable. That's a hurdle we still haven't cleared yet. So in the early 20s, it wasn't long before other brands got in on the action, including Motorola, Honor, and eventually Google, each with their own ideas around foldable displays. Motorola figured out early on how to have the display fold in a teardrop shape within the hinge so the device could fold completely flat. But that panel also had its share of issues, the reports of the screen protector becoming delaminated in first-gen Razrs, and screens even dying around that hinge area. And if you look at a modern foldable like the Magic V5, then you'll see this tightly contained teardrop shape internally around the hinge is indeed how they're able to make this fold completely flat. Of course, we can't talk screens and hinges without talking about the dreaded display crease, the recessed area in the middle that's still visible and feelable in current foldables. But new devices like the Magic V5 make this much less of an issue than earlier generations. In part, that's thanks to structural changes to the hinge and screen, but also improved reflection cancelling coatings in newer foldables that makes it way less visible when you're using it out and about. It remains to be seen whether the crease will ever be 100% invisible, but you can't deny the progress that's been made in this area since 2019. To me, in a device like the Magic V5, it's basically a non-issue now. Display cutouts are one feature of earlier folds that's now mostly a thing of the past, replaced in the V5 here, like most others, with a single hole punch for the inner screen's front camera. So far, it's only really been Samsung that's gone all in on under-display cameras for that inner panel, giving the illusion of a completely uninterrupted display by carefully positioning a lower res array of pixels over that camera and turning them off when the camera's in use. This tech has its own drawbacks though, often impacting image quality from the camera. We know from various leaks that this is the route that Apple wants to go down eventually to get rid of the dynamic island in the iPhone, so I think if you fast forward 10 years, this will be the tech that everyone ends up using to solve the current display cutout problem, whether it's in phones, foldables, tablets, or even laptops. Water and dust resistance is also much tougher in a foldable, which is why historically they have had lower IP ratings than flat devices. The first gen foldables, for instance, had no IP rating whatsoever. The main reason for that, obviously, is the hinge. They're effectively folding puzzles with moving parts, so they're tougher to seal up than a flat smartphone. We've only recently seen some foldables like the V5 here including IP58 and IP59 ratings. Of course, great hinges and displays only matter if the phone stays alive long enough to actually use them, and that's where battery technology had to catch up. Battery life is the other big pain point, and another area where early foldables really struggled. I mean, think about it. You've got a regular phone-sized block of 3D space, and you've got to fill it with a battery pack large enough to power a bigger, energy-hungry inner screen. Improvements in chip efficiency in recent years have helped. Let's not forget how rough battery life was on those first couple gens of foldables with those early 5G modems. But the biggest breakthrough in battery tech has come thanks to silicon carbon batteries. These fancy new cells replace some of the graphite usually found in the battery's anode with silicon carbon, allowing for greater energy density. Basically, silicon carbon batteries allow foldables to finally exceed lithium-ion slab phones in battery life, packing more energy into a similar space. There are technical trade-offs. They can expand more than a traditional lithium-ion cell, leading to potential concerns about a spicy pillow situation, and they're more complex to manufacture. More silicon means more energy, but also potentially more swelling, so the challenge is balancing the two. But the capacity gains so far are really quite impressive. Samsung is still using traditional lithium ions in their foldables, topping out at 4400 mAh. Meanwhile, Honor is pushing 5820 mAh in the Magic V5, up from the first gen silicon carbon cells that we were using a couple of years ago, in 5000 mAh cells occupying a similar physical space. We can't release battery benchmarks just yet for the Honor Magic V5, but you can kinda do the math. A Snapdragon 8 Elite can run perfectly fine with a much smaller cell of around 5000 mAh, so you've got some decent wiggle room there to allow for the time that you're going to be using the inner display. Software is just as important as hardware though, and Android itself has adapted over the past 6 years to take that all-important inner screen experience from essentially the same phone UI stretched out into a squarish frame to something that's much more akin to a mini tablet interface. Now, the less said about that original Royale FlexPi UI the better, but even early foldable versions of One UI were pretty basic, with multitasking handled through the Edge panel here, and plenty of compatibility issues in places with certain apps. Just as foldable hardware was maturing in 2022, Android 12L brought real changes to layout scaling, app continuity, and multitasking tools, helping foldables feel more like purpose-built devices and less like a stretched-out smartphone. And the introduction of taskbars made it easier to take full advantage of split-screen and windowed multitasking. Samsung's One UI 4.1.1 in 2022 built on this, giving the Galaxy Z Fold 4 at the time arguably the best multitasking experience in any foldable. That was until OnePlus debuted its Open Canvas on the OnePlus Open in 2023, which kinda turned the foldable's inner screen into sort of a moving viewport within a freeform space for full-screen or split-screen apps. Kind of a shame that that was the last foldable released in the West to feature that software, OnePlus parent brand Oppo seeming to have abandoned the foldable market outside of China. Honor has its own approximation of Open Canvas on the Magic V5, which is a great improvement on the taskbar which is added in last year's Magic V3, once again letting you quickly hop between 2 or 3 full-screen or split-screen apps. Foldable software isn't just about juggling multiple apps though. As the category's matured, brands have started to have fun with this unique form factor, with features like Samsung's Flex Mode and Honor's Hover Mode letting you intelligently split the screen when playing or making media. A similar half-open configuration could also give you a more seamless conversational experience in translation apps. Google and Motorola include camera features on their cover screens using cute characters to attract the attention of kids or pets when you're shooting photos of them. And Moto has pioneered a full Android experience on its Razr phone's cover screens, meaning clamshells could do more without fully opening up. And of course, most foldables made it easier to take great selfies with rear-facing cameras. As early teething issues passed and more affordable models became available, especially those clamshells, consumers started to take note, and global sales estimates for foldables landed in the 16 to 18 million range as of 2023. Still a niche category, but undeniably a significant one. Which of course brings us to what might be the foldable to beat in 2025, the Magic V5 itself. I spent about 3 weeks with this phone at the time we're publishing this video, which, to be clear, is definitely not a review because the software is still pre-release. Now first things first, on the face of it, the dimensions are pretty wild here. Folded out, it measures just 4.1mm, just about enough to have a 0.1mm lead on the also very thin Samsung Fold 7. When it's shut, it's thinner than a Galaxy S23 Ultra at 8.8mm. It's also lighter than a lot of slab phones at 217 grams. The biggest thing that gets you is a foldable that doesn't feel bulky or unwieldy when it's closed up. It really just feels like a regular smartphone. In part, that's down to the materials being used here. The reflective gradient pattern on the back is a matte textured polycarbonate, not glass. The light weight is even more apparent when it's opened out, feeling incredibly svelte for the display area on offer. The display dimensions haven't changed from the previous Magic V3, but what has changed is the peak brightness level. The inner display now maxes out the same 5000 nits as the outer panel, a big deal if you're using it out and about in the summer sun. And once again, the reflection cancelling coating on the inner screen is a huge quality of life benefit. Another impressive spec point is the battery. Despite its supreme thinness, Honor's packed in a 5820 mAh cell in this device, that's bigger than any foldable I'm aware of, and an order of magnitude larger than the current Samsung competition. It also charges quicker, 66 watts over a wire or 50 watts wirelessly. Elsewhere, the spec sheet is just as full-featured as you would expect. It runs a Snapdragon 8 Elite, the full 8-core version, not the cut-down 7-core variant used in some other foldables, with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 storage. The elephant in the room is of course this big old camera bump around the back. It's noticeable if looking side on and definitely does raise the phone up if it's laid flat on a table, but it isn't particularly bothersome in day-to-day use. The camera bulge is larger this year to accommodate a few upgrades, mainly the telephoto, which is now a 64 megapixel 3x periscope lens with an f/2.5 aperture, reportedly using a 1/2-inch sensor. The ultra-wide also gets a welcome bump up to 50 megapixels with f2. That's impressive considering Samsung is sticking with the same ancient 10 megapixel 3x lens in the Fold 7. That's about all we can say about the cameras right now until we get final firmware, but already it looks like Samsung's Fold 7 has some pretty serious competition. So in going back and looking at those first-gen folds from the darkest depths of 2019 and comparing to where we are today with the Magic V5, it's amazing how many of those early deal breakers and pain points just aren't an issue today. I mean, just compare it to the world of flat phones, which have largely plateaued over the same period, and the pace of technological development here seems pretty wild. Foldables are still more expensive, sure, and they'll always be more fragile than an equivalent flat phone. But a lot of the reasons to skip a foldable earlier in the 2020s simply no longer apply here. The thickness and weight are basically the same as a regular phone. The battery appears to be big enough on paper for battery anxiety to potentially be banished to foldable history. It folds completely flat with an inner display that's exceptionally bright and doesn't get smudgy or reflection-y. And those multitasking features are getting better all the time. So it is the end of an era for foldables, the era of overpriced, compromised, gimmicky devices. Of course, the price does remain to be seen. It'll surely be well into 4 figures. The Magic V3 sold for $16.99 here in the UK, which is well into super premium territory. But if any foldable available in the West is worth that kind of cash, it might be this one. We finally arrived in the glorious future predicted by that Samsung concept ad back in 2013, with what I think is the ideal compromise-free foldable form factor. And that's kind of interesting because this sort of book-style form factor wasn't the only foldable device teased in that Samsung video. No, the company also showcased this rollable concept. Now so far, no mass-market rollable phones exist, and it's kind of easy to see why if you look at the technical challenges involved. You need to bend the entire screen, not just one central point around a hinge. That increases the likelihood of mechanical failure over time. There's even less space for your battery, and the delicate foldable display is exposed 100% of the time. So I don't know, I'm not convinced rollables will ever carve out much of a niche, at least in the phone market. Lenovo has already showed that technology has some pretty neat applications in the laptop space. Could the future be trifolds like the Huawei Mate X-T, or the Samsung equivalent that's probably already been announced by the time you watch this? Well, maybe, but a trifold design has the delicate foldable panel being exposed more often than not. They're always going to be thicker than a regular foldable, and the pricing? Well,
3,499 euros. What?
So I wouldn't expect them to be much more than an expensive niche within an already very pricey product category. While rollables and trifolds may look futuristic, the real revolution might have already arrived. I think phones like the Magic V5 here show that compromise-free foldables are already here, with all the benefits of a premium flat phone, and basically as few compromises as there are ever likely to be. But what do you think? Share your thoughts on the journey of foldable tech over the past 6 years down in the comments. Let me know what you think of the Magic V5 while you're down there, and stick around for more tech retrospectives and looks ahead in the near future. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.